Thank you for watching Valor Studios on YouTube. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome to Rollin Bones with Ryan Howard, your RPG treasure trove. I'm your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and welcome one and all to Valor Studios. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Valor Studios is an RPG content creation community where we love to share our stories with the rest of the world. If you like what you see tonight, definitely give us a subscribe and a follow here on Twitch. That's one of the best ways to know when we are going live on Mondays, is to get that notification here on Twitch. And we definitely appreciate the support of a subscribe. Not expected, but definitely appreciated. If you want to stay up to date with what we have going on, you can follow Valor Studios on Twitter, or you can join our Discord community, which you'll see a link for here in the chat. And that's a great way to see all the announcements that we have coming up, which we'll get to at the end of tonight's show. We have a very exciting thing to share with you guys. And that's also a great way to communicate with those of us who are involved here at Valor Studios and, just talk about gaming ideas and create a really cool, thriving community of, folks who watch this show and want to give us feedback and, want to give us your ideas for what you'd like to see in future Valor Studios content. We also want to thank those of you who are watching this on YouTube or listening to this in audio. We love that you're supporting us in that way. If you want to join us live every Monday night, we're doing this here at twitch.tv/Valor Studios at 8 p.m. Central Time. And those of you who are with us live, if you've got friends who would love this conversation, the YouTube link and the audio link are the best ways to share that. This can be found on any podcatcher and, of course, on the Valor Studios YouTube channel. So, without further ado, I want to introduce everyone to tonight's guest. He is very heavily involved in the Dungeon Crawl Classics line at Goodman Games. He is just, one of the loudest voices when it comes to spreading the love of Dungeon Crawl Classics, a game system that is very near and dear to my heart. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Michael Curtis. Michael, welcome to Rollin Bones.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on.
So we are here to discuss something that's very near and dear to my heart tonight, apparently. You were talk DCC. So, yeah, so I'm always very excited to talk about that. So what do you got for me?
Well, what I've got for you at first are these questions that everyone gets asked the first time they come on Rollin Bones. So let's begin at the beginning here. Mike, how did you get into role-playing games?
So I got into role-playing games in 1980. When I was a young lad visiting relatives in upstate New York, and it was over Christmas break, and it was a rainy day. And my cousin Matt, who was about 2 or 3 years older than me, said, "Do you want to play a game?" And I said, "Sure." And he went upstairs and came down with a copy of the Holmes Basic Dungeons and Dragons set, which is the kind of blue and white box with the David Sutherland dragon on the front of it. And he said, "Okay, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons." And he proceeded to hand me an entire party of adventurers. So a lot of people say, "Well, what was your first character?" Mine was an entire party. I ran an entire party of adventurers through a dungeon. And my cousin Matt said, "All right." I said, "Well, how do you play this game? Where's the board?" And all the rest of it. He said, "Well, we kind of make it up as we go along." I said, "Fine." He said, "You go into the dungeon, you find the treasure." I said, "Perfect." So me and my 6 character sheets, we went into the dungeon, and he was describing a room with giant ants, and we fought the giant ants, and I found like 18 copper pieces, and I was, "Hooray!" And he said, "What do you do now?" I said, "I go back to town." And he said, I said, "What?" He said, "Well, I found the treasure, right?" And he said, "No, there's more of it." So that I realized that, okay, this was just the beginning of stuff. So then I spent that afternoon running an entire party of adventurers through a dungeon. It wasn't one of like the famous ones. I think Matt probably made it up. And I remember encountering a hellhound for the first time and immediately slamming the door. So I kind of noped right out of that early on, displaying some great long-term dungeon survival tactics. And then proceeded to fall down a series of pits of increasingly depth. And I wasn't worried until we ran to a 50-foot one because we only had 50 feet of rope. So I thought if we fell into a 60-foot pit, we were in deep trouble. So that was my first experience with D&D. I came back home from that Christmas break, and I said to my mom, I said, "You have to buy me this game." and from then I was hooked.
Gotcha. So in that time since that first game, what would you say your favorite game system that you've used to play in and to run is?
That is kind of like asking. That's asking what my favorite movie is. I don't have like an all-time favorite of anything. I always have like my favorite for this time period, like like what mood I'm in. So because there's just so many of it. I mean, I'm contractually obligated, of course, to say Dungeon Crawl Classics. And Dungeon Crawl Classics, of course, has been very important to me, and I do love running a lot of DCC. But one of the things I love about DCC, it is immensely hackable. It lends itself to basically almost any situation I can think of. But at the same time, I'm a big fan of. I've been playing for 40 plus years now. So I have seen the industry. I've seen the hobby go from level based, 3D6 down the line to, point buy systems to basically to, like indie games now to like literally storytelling games, where everybody takes a turn as the game master. I mean, I'm old school at heart, but that's just what I know about. But as part of my job these days, as I work professionally in the industry, it's me kind of keeping aware of what else is out there and making, just trying to see what else is coming down the line. So it's really depending on what the mood is. I've been running the One Ring campaign for the last 4 years for friends of mine, but then again, I spent the first summer of the pandemic running DCC for 15 people. We had a campaign that ran with 3 different groups going back and forth. I ran 3 different sessions a week, one for the lawful group, one for the neutral group, one for the chaotic group, and we were trying to figure out. It was literally to determine the fate of the universe, whether law, neutral, or chaos would end up, affecting the multiverse. So I do not have a favorite one. It's like music. It's depending on what my mood is. So
Absolutely. Now that's interesting. Running 3 campaigns that are split that way into the alignments. Were they affecting each other's campaigns?
Very much so, because I have been interested in the roots of role playing for a long time now. So I have my D&D white box. I can't afford a wood grain box, but I have a white box. So I've gone back to like the roots of the hobby. And one of the things that has always struck me is that the concept of alignment, which gets bashed a lot, it's like, well, this is kind of stupid. From a war game sense, it makes a lot of sense. It's basically literally alignment, like choosing a side. It's not like necessarily like morality, like lawful is good and chaos is evil. It's literally picking a side in some sort of conflict. So I took a lot of that when I was running the big campaign. So it was, law and neutrality and chaos. They were all working basically for their side. So it was a matter of, I have a little bit of a wargaming background, so I'm used to kind of like, like there's certain objectives you have to, achieve in order to like win a wargaming scenario. So I kind of applied that to the campaign. So because we were doing intermittently and we're all doing it over Zoom, we knew we had 3 or 4 hours to like, do every session. So at the start of each session, it was kind of a West Marches. It's like they always began like in their side's headquarters, and then they would go out and do a mission, and then they would come back at the end of it. So this way, if somebody wasn't able to make the next week, it wouldn't be a big deal. But gotcha. So they always have like one main goal that they had to acquire, and then they would have like sub goals along the way. And like if they acquired the main goal, they got like 3 points, and like sub goals were also worth a point or whatever it was. So every week I would tally, basically how much advancement that each side did. And then that's how I kept track of how like the overall, the course of the war for the multiverse was going on. And there was a Facebook group, and every week I would post like an update, which was basically like what the other side, it was kind of like the rumors that were going around, and it would usually be like if one side got up to something that was like public knowledge, they would hear about it on the face group, and then like the other sides would be like nobody knew what the other group was up to. So there was a lot of going back and forth and everything, and in a great case, the neutral team actually they forged a letter and they managed to get it into like the chaotic information network. So so chaos actually made an attack on a big skull that was orbiting the planet because they thought there was an artifact there. Little did they know that neutrality had already got up there, raided it, and got the artifact out. So they had basically threw a red herring in Chaos's path, and Chaos followed it, and basically took them out of the big triumphant, who's going to win the multiverse fight. So it was very much everybody's actions was influencing the other one. It was something I had always wanted to do, and it just the first summer of COVID seemed like the perfect time to do it because when else am I going to have 15 people with nothing to do? But sit at home and talk on talk on their computer for 8 weeks during the summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to running your games, and then when you get the chance to actually be a player in the games, how would you describe your play style when it comes to both of those things?
So there's something which kind of falls back with both of them. Like when when I'm a game master, I very much like to encourage collaborative elements to the game. I like when people suggest stuff, even if it's not something that I currently have in mind. When I do world build, I don't prep longer than 20 minutes for any really game campaign or any game session, just because I like the challenge of coming up with stuff, but I also like being open up for people to suggest stuff, and I like to encourage a collaborative play environment. And when I am a player, I also like to do the same thing. And what I do that is that I often try to pay attention to what's going on at the table. And if somebody is not getting a lot of, table time, if somebody is kind of like hanging back or anything, just either because it's their personality or because maybe there's another person on the player who's much louder. I always try to kind of say, hey, what do you think we should do? What's your plan on this? And try to draw wallflowers into the game and have them kind of, involved in trying to get that collaborative energy going on. That's something which doesn't really change depending on what side of the screen I'm on. I guess I'm always trying to keep an eye out on everybody's having a good time. And if I can facilitate that, no matter what type of screen I'm on, I do that. So.
Gotcha. Now, those of us who put a lot of time and effort into this hobby as, streamers, content creators, writers, artists, we do a lot of this out of love, and that love comes from many fond memories we have around the table. So, Mike, if you had to pick a fondest RPG memory, what would that be?
Oh, God. So I have one, and it's very atypical, but I think it is in college. There was a group of us who we were playing. This was a first edition AD&D campaign at this point, and it was a rather protracted game, and it had basically one of those things where it was the classic. There was like a baby who was a lost heir. And there was like the evil warlord was trying to get rid of the baby and try to usurp the thing, and we ended up basically trying to save the baby and try to be the resistance. Basically, we were the ones who were going to get together and overthrow, stop the evil warlord's plans. It's a while, so I don't always ever remember what the plans were, but I do remember that we had we had finally gotten the baby to like a group of monks, and we had gotten the baby out of the way, and we were on our way to somewhere else. So we were traveling down a coastline, and it was a very quiet. Like there weren't any fights going on, but we had stopped for the night. And we were along the beach, and we were in the side, like the ocean were breaking on the beach. And it was one of those very immersive moments where everybody just got into their character, and we began to describe what we were doing during our downtime. Like we had got a little bonfire going on the beach, and like one of the characters had a dog, and like they were playing basically placing fetch with a dog, and we were talking about like character background stuff, and we were just talking about like kind of in character hopes and dreams of what we managed to what we had hoped to achieve with all this. And it was one of those moments where all the players were just kind of like Jones, like they were all on the same wavelength. And for a little bit of time, just kind of fell away from the game, and we weren't thinking about like, okay, well, what's the next monster, or what plus my sword is, or anything like that. We just kind of got into the moment, and it wasn't very long. We maybe killed about a half hour of it, but it was one of those moments of storytelling. Just again, everybody was contributing to it, and I think all of us had a pretty much a very clear mental image, and we were very immersed in that moment. No grandiose thing, but it just, this was sometime in the early mid 90s. So the fact that I still remember that, almost close to 30 years later, I would say that was a pretty special moment. So I say not your usual one. It wasn't, wasn't dispatching the Demogorgon with an actual 20 or anything, but it was, just being that shared kind of moment with your fellow players, and able, just the whole way that this is the play pretend, and and the veil between pretend and reality kind of slipped away in a very positive way for a very short period of time. So that's always been a memory that I've always treasured. And one of those ones you couldn't replicate if you tried again, for 50 years. It was just, that time everything fell into place.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely something that draws me to the game as well. Those moments where you forget that you're not your character, where you get to kind of cast away the real life and fully fall into who your character is. Now, I've had situations where I got upset about something that I shouldn't have gotten upset about because that happened. But there is a good positive side to that as well, and that moment that you described there sounds awesome.
And there's a reason that role playing is used in psychotherapy. I mean,
Mhm. Absolutely. Now we've got one last introductory question for you, and I will warn you, this is a bit of a doozy. The answer to this question can be as philosophical or as sophomoric as you want it to be.
okay.
Mike, if you could put anything on a T-shirt, what would it be?
Anything on a t-shirt. I would say no boring shit. Because that's become my go-to advice, for when people ask me how to run good games. And it's also, as I get older and older, I realize my time is finite. So I would rather be doing stuff which is at least memorable. So yeah, so we didn't establish whether there was any explicit content allowed on the show before we began shooting. So I hope we're okay with it.
You're good to go. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So, my advice is become write that on the top of your GM screen when you were running a game, and whenever you get lost, looked at that, and then just that's what you do next. So
Mhm. Every now and then, I like to answer this question myself, and because we have you on the show, I will give one of my possible answers for this.
okay.
Having recently read the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser story, where Fafhrd becomes the acolyte of the God in the Bottle, I want the image of completely shaven Fafhrd bursting out of the tavern that he had been tied up in, with the bed still attached to him,
Mhm.
screaming "the jug" on a shirt.
That would be a good one. A bit esoteric, but those of us who would know would appreciate it, right?
Mhm. Yep. And again, it's one of those shirts that should either be very, very cartoony or very detailed.
Right, you go either way with that,
Yep.
or you just make it a double-sided shirt.
Yep.
You get them coming and going that way.
Mhm. Yeah, one side's like a Brahm or Larry Elmore type oil painting, and then the back side's like stick figures.
Right. Like bar via order of the stick. That's
Yep,
it.
absolutely. Now, getting into stuff that's more specific to you and what you do. Again, we have to kind of start at the beginning here. How did you get involved with Joseph Goodman and Goodman Games and Dungeon Crawl Classics?
So back in the late aughts, about 2008, back when kind of the old school Renaissance was kind of not quite hit its full stride, but was still going on. And the blogosphere was there was a lot of old school blogs, but not as many as there would be about a year later. So there was a lot of, so I had been out of the hobby for a good number of years, and about 2008, I started dipping my toes back into it. And I checked out, like 3.5 was the edition at that point. And, I read 3.5. I said, this isn't D&D as I remember. So I started looking for a way to get because is there a way to adapt 3.5 to second edition? And that, by doing kind of web research, I discovered the old school Renaissance. And since everybody had a blog at that point, I was really enjoying the creative, atmosphere at that time. I said, I'm going to do a blog too. So I had one, and I had been up and running maybe 2 or 3 months at this point. And I decided I want to take a break for 2 weeks and not have to post. So I wrote a series of blogs, which I called the Dungeon Alphabet, which was just basically the 26 classic dungeon tropes. A is for apple, B is for box, but it was, A is for altars, B is for books, C is for caves, that kind of stuff. And I posted it on the blog, once every, like, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I would go, hey, I take 2 weeks off. I don't have to worry about posting anything. And I think after like the first week, I got an email from this Joseph Goodman character, and he said, I'm really enjoying the Dungeon Alphabet series. Would you be interested in developing this into a role-playing game supplement? So I said, let me look. And so I did some research about Joe Goodman and looked at Goodman Games. I said, hey, he looks legit. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? And I said, let's ride this rocket. Let's see what's going to go. He basically taught me how to develop a material for professional publication. And I wrote the manuscript for the Dungeon Alphabet, I guess, over the next couple of months, and submitted it. And he really enjoyed it. And eventually, about roughly a year later, it was finally published. And for a while, at that point, it was the best-selling Goodman Games product that Goodman Games had ever put out. So Joe had just figured, hey, this guy, he's got something here, and more importantly, he can make his deadlines. So around that point, I said, I have a follow-up. I called the Adventurer's Almanac. He said, great, start working on it. And then Joe said, I'm working on this game called Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. Would you take a look at it and kind of basically give me your thoughts on it? So I got the alpha draft version of the DCC rules at that point, and I gave him I read through them, gave him some feedback. And then he asked me to do some additional writing on that. And, that was pretty much my foot in the door. And I haven't stopped working for Joe since. So I started working for him in 2008. First thing I ever did was 2009. And here we are, 2022. And I'm now director of product development for Dungeon Crawl Classics for Goodman Games. So that's how the story began.
Gotcha.
I'm still riding that same rocket that Joe put me on when he said, you want to do this Dungeon Alphabet thing. So
that's something that I've heard a lot of people say about Joseph Goodman, is that he's real good about coming alongside people that he wants to work with, or people that are working within kind of the DCC landscape, and helping support them and helping get the Triceratops on the corner of their book, and just make sure everything's up to standards, which I think is really cool that he's willing and able to do that for the community around his game.
Everything I've learned about the industry, I've learned through Joe. And I mean, Joe has been around. Goodman Games just celebrated its 20th anniversary. So, I mean, it got started during the 3.0, like not even the 3.5, the 3.0, open game license boom. And if you look back on the carnage and wreckage that is strewn across the landscape from that 3.0 boom. How many of those companies are still, functioning? And that says a heck of a lot about Joe's business sense and about
Yeah.
how, what he knows about this industry. And he, from the very beginning, he has been, if you want a third party license for DCC, it's very easy to get. There are just certain things you have to, like, you just, certain things that you just kind of, we are somewhat family friendly. But if for the most part, he's really easy to work with. And because of that, I still the DCC community is one of the most creative bunch of people that I've ever had the pleasure of noticing, being part of. And they constantly amaze me with the stuff that people are coming up with. And that's one of the reasons why it took us forever to put out the annual, which was our running joke. It's like we were like, hey, we'll put out one of these every year. And then we saw what the third party was pointing out. We were like, wow, we got to step up our game because all the stuff that we thought we were going to cover, the third party people were doing, and they were doing it great. So by the time 6 years later that we finally got the annual out, we're like, that's why we had magical mustaches in it, because nobody else had come up with magical mustaches in the third party yet. So
yeah. I mean, there is, like you said, just a wealth of amazing third party content out there from I mean, one of my favorites is obviously David Beatty's Weird Frontiers game. That is a very interesting take on the DCC rules with the Western stuff incorporated, which I'm on board for anything with cowboys in it. So
yeah, and the great thing about Joe is not only does he support it with granting the third party license or anything, but there's third party stuff for sale on the Goodman Games site. There's things like Wizards, they have like their the DM's guild or anything, so you can get stuff through like drive through, but you can't go to like wizards.com /D&D and pick up something that has been being put out by somebody who's writing third party stuff for Wizards. And and the terms, where the DM's guild stuff, it takes what, 25% or whatever it is 50%, whatever it is you're selling to that. Joseph's like, like whatever, man. It's like, I'll give you advice on how to do it, but it's your money in the long run. So, it's just, it's a great, very creative, nurturing environment. And I'm constantly amazed about what people are coming up with,
absolutely. Now, one thing, actually, there are two things that have to be discussed when you have Michael Curtis on the show. So we'll start with the Chained Coffin. Tell us a little bit about that particular adventure anthology, where those ideas came from, and how that particular aspect of DCC came to be.
So that basically came up with the fact that Joe is very open to listening to ideas, if you know how to ground them correctly. So I went. So I'm a New Yorker by birth, and I went to college in the Catskill region. I'm originally from Long Island, New York. I'm from a very flat, sandy place. But from a very young age, in fact, when I would go up and visit the same cousin who taught me to play D&D, I would get off Long Island and I would see rocks. So, so and which amazed me, like the idea of rocks and boulders and all the rest of that stuff. When the biggest thing you see on the island is, maybe like fieldstone, like a cobblestone that's on somebody's driveway. So I have often said that, if I had not made it in another life, I could probably be a very happy life as a geologist. But I went to school right in the shadows of the Catskills. So I was, I was kind of part of the, roughly part of the Appalachian chain. So, I've always enjoyed mountains. I've always enjoyed that kind of thing. And that was kind of just in the back of my mind until I read Manly Wade Wellman. When I read the John the Balladeer, the Silver John tales, which are, of course, all take place in North Carolina, right in the heart of Appalachia. And I enjoyed them to a great deal. I think Manly Wade Wellman is a wonderful writer. He had a great ear for language. And that's something I've always, as a writer and as my degree is in English, I enjoy watching what people can do with language. So Manly Wayman's characters sounded very authentic, and I like turns of phrases. So and they're great, entertaining, spooky, horrific stories. So one of the names, which is on the classic Appendix N, which is, Gary Gygax's list of what influenced Dungeons and Dragons, and is also kind of like the backbone of DCC, Manly Wade Melman is listed there. And I said, Joe, I really love Manly Wade Melman. I really enjoy the story. Nobody that I know has done an American fantasy, kind of, stuff. I mean, Stephen King's Dark Tower, maybe a little bit, but, not to the point where, so I said, I want to write basically Manly Wade Wellman with the kind of with the serial numbers, filed off, and make it a fantasy setting rather than just rather than kind of like, American 1950s setting. So he said, all right, so I did, the idea was I would write a 10,000 word adventure, and that was good. That was going to be the Chain Coffin. And Joe's like, oh, well, we hadn't really done much of the way of kickstarting at that point, so like we'll try it out as a Kickstarter. And he said, do we need a hook? So I said, oh, we'll have the spinning puzzle on that, and that's why we'll Kickstarter it, and we'll see what we can do it, everything like that. And then the Kickstarter just took off for whatever reason. It's like that adventure just struck a chord. And I said, Joe, if this turns out to be popular, I have a whole bunch of other stuff that I could write in this setting. And he said, get to work on it because we're going to do stretch goals. and that's how the Chain Coffin went from kind of this crazy idea that I had from going to school in the Appalachian, going to school in the Catskills, to this first box set. and surprisingly, it has apparently struck a chord with a lot of people, especially a lot of people who are Appalachian natives who were just who realized this and I got a lot of emails like, this is really good, like you did a great job. And I said, not bad for a New York Yankee, huh? It's like I don't know what I managed to do, but I think the secret is because I think I treated like the Shud folk, who obviously, I did my research, it was so easy and has been done so much in the past of people just engaging in stereotypes. And that's something that I stayed very much away from. It's like I wanted to treat everybody as people. And and this day, like you still, people will talk about, like the Shutter Mountains and the Chain Coffin, and somebody will eventually throw in like a Deliverance GIF, or something on that. And I'm just like, you're not getting it, man. It's like, my family far enough back is actually North Carolina. I mean, they're Scotch Irish. So there's a little bit of but I was born and raised in New York. So anything is in there is pure genetic DNA memory. It's that combined with, extenuous, so very deep and very thorough research. Mm-hmm. So that's how that came to be, and surprised all of us on how well it turned out. And it's one of those settings. I don't like looking back at my past work for the most part, but like the Shutter Mountains is something is a place I never get tired of going back to, because there's always something like I've yet to tap into for inspiration there.
Yeah, and as a Scots Irish North Carolinian myself, I thank you for doing your research and not leaning so heavily on the stereotypes. It was Jim Goad in Redneck Manifesto that said the hillbilly is the only cardboard cutout left standing in the shooting gallery of the American dramatis personae. So
I definitely agree. It's and it was that's I mean, you read enough Foxfire books, which there was a lot of research reading by Foxfire. So I was like, I mean, there's more here. There's a lot here. So, I guess I did all right.
Absolutely. And lots of good has come from the Scots Irish North Carolinians and Georgians, including Robert E. Howard, for those of you out there who are skeptical of me talking about my heritage there. So the other thing that, of course, has to be mentioned is you were one of the biggest players in one of my favorite DCC products, that being the Lenkmar box set for Dungeon Crawl Classics. Obviously, Lenkmar, it makes up the DNA of D&D, not just in that it's included in Appendix N, but it was one of the original city supplements put out for D&D. So, what was it that made you guys want to pursue Lenkmar? Was it that kind of ingrainedness in role-playing DNA, or just a general love of Fritz Lieber? What was it?
So the way that the like bar came about is that I had been exposed to the like bar stories um, long before I read them. And I was aware of them because the Newan mythos appears in the old hardback deities and demigods, and so I remember as a kid looking through that like this is amazing, like there was like a thieves guild and like the Slayers Brotherhood and like all this stuff was really really evocative. But this was 1980, 1985, 1986. So it's not like I could go on Amazon and order them or anything. So my local library didn't have them. So it was so I just there was just kind of this concept which I sounded really cool, but I had no firsthand experience with it until in '88 I saw the Knight and Knave of Swords, the last of the collections, on a spinner rack in a pharmacy. And I took a look at the cover. There's a big guy and a little guy, although the little guy was kind of dressed like Napoleon. And I'm like, that's what and I look it over and I look at the back and like I recognize those names. So I got it, but I picked it up there, and a lot of people will tell you that the last anthology is definitely not the best. But I read it and I'm like, where's this Lankmar place? Where's all this? Because of course at this point they had completely left Lankmar behind or anything like. So I was just like, all right, this is still good. Um, but but then in college, my college library actually had the first 7 books in the library shelves, and I had discovered that one day, and I spent basically a week just reading my way through it all. So I read that, and it basically changed the entire way that I approach Dungeons and Dragons. It did the entire I went from Dragonlance high fantasy to what I call blue collar fantasy, which is very much Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. It's always been very evocative to me. Cut to a decade or two later, I'm doing work for Joe at this point, and all of a sudden I get an email, and the email is nothing but a picture, and the picture is the license that he had just signed with the library estate. So I said, "Oh my God, we now have the library license," because Joe is obviously, as I mentioned, the Appendix N is very much a part of Dungeon Crawl Classic's DNA. So Joe, he's pursuing the estates for the most part, because there's Moorcock's the only one on the Appendix N list who's still alive. And wanting to do stuff with have you ever considered about licensing this to do role playing stuff? And Liber was the first one. So the library estate said yes, and that's how we got involved, because Joe wanted to do a DCC like bar setting. So it was totally his idea, and then I guess it was probably like in June or something that this email went around. And at Gen Con 2 months later, we had kind of a group meeting at one of the restaurants after the booth had closed for the day, and it was Joe and Harley Stroh and Doug Kovacs and myself, and I think Brendan LaSalle was there. And we just started. We started hashing out the idea, like, how would we do like bar? How would we do like bar for DCC? We threw some ideas around. And then I got home and I went through all of my stuff too. I had the complete Dragon magazine archives on PDF, and I went through and I pulled all of the backstory about Liber and the stuff that he had done, and the old Liber, the old Lankbar war game. And I had a literary magazine that had an interview with Fritz Liber in it, and I scanned those and I put together this packet and I sent it to Joe and said, look, so we have additional background stuff that we can draw upon. And Joe said, congratulations, you are now lead designer on DCC Lankmar.
Nice.
So it was a job that I did not know that I wanted, and I was very happy to get. And then I was absolutely panicked because D&D had done Lankmar. They had done the City of Adventure, the old gray covered book for first edition, and then they did a lot of stuff for second edition. And the second edition stuff is middling quality at best. And I knew it was very easy to get Lankmar wrong. And the kind of our battle cry going into that, Doug Kovacs and Harley and I were like, we're going to do Lankmar right. And that was our goal for 5 years. Basically, as we slowly evolved everything, Lankmar was not a cash grab by any like we announced it. It took forever I think it was 5 years when it was finally in hand. But we had it ready. But the whole kind of getting everything done, we had there was some fulfillment issues long before COVID and everything. Well, eventually we got it out. We kind of held our breath, and I have heard a lot of very positive responses. So we were just like, I guess we managed to do it right, But I mean, it was actually not as hard of a job, because a lot of Lankmar is inherently kind of in the DNA of DCC. So we basically, it wasn't a matter of like having to rewrite DCC. It was just a matter of kind of tweaking some things to make the fit all the more better, so so that is kind of how that is how that particular piece of the puzzle fell in. And it was a long, kind of painstaking and terrifying process. But when the box set was finally released, I'm very proud of the work that the team did on that, and I'm very glad that the response from the fans have been. And I'm glad that people are kind of discovering Langmar for the first time due to it. It was, I was, like I said, I was aware of it since like the mid '80s, although I had not read it until some years later. But it's one of those things. It's like the books kind of go in and out of print, so they're not always available. But now it seems, at least they're available. At least, you can get them for Kindle at the very least. So they are available out there. Although there's a lot of people I see people posting like the old classic '60s covers every time they manage to track them down in like a used bookstore somewhere for $250. So.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say, I've been consuming these books in the audiobook form, and the reader that they have on Audible doing these books is very, very good at differentiating his voice when he's Fafhrd, when he's the Grey Mouser, giving everyone kind of a unique feel to them. So if you are a listener of audiobooks, the collections of the Langmar audiobooks are very, very good. Now, along the same lines, the next question I have for you, when it comes to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, which story would you say is your favorite? And if you can't narrow it down to one story, which of the collections would you say is your favorite?
Bizarre, no, I'm sorry. Lean Times and Langmar. Lean Times and Langmar, the one we were talking about,
Yep.
with earlier, because that is such a dense story. That is such a commentary on so many things. It's not only is it just an enjoyable like sword and sorcery story, but it has a lot like Fritz Leiber. He basically was at seminary right after college in New Jersey. So at least he dabbled in a career in religion at one point. And of course, he is the son of Fritz Leiber Sr., who was a favorite stage actor, and so he knew basically the whims and fortunes of the kind of the acting. And later on he was in Los Angeles, so he was friends with not one of the Carradines, one of the name is one of the Barrymores. So he knew kind of the ins and outs of of Hollywood. And Lean Times and Langmar is a commentary on both religion and like popularity and fame and the fleetingness of it. So there's a lot to read into it, and so I just enjoy that story so much. Although I will say, although I do that, the first chapter also of Swords of Langmar, the only novel, is the best role playing applicable conversation I have ever seen in either fantasy or like genre, role playing tied fiction. If you just the conversation that Fafhrd and the Grey Masters are having as they're walking back toward Langmar, coming home from a vacation from a misadventure, is absolutely hysterical. And you can see that the kind of the consequences and happenstances around that happening at any role playing game table that you care to name. So
yeah, the interplay between the two friends in these books is very kind of reminiscent of table talk, even though these stories came out before table talk would have been a thing. The way that Fafhrd and Grey Mouser needle each other and egg each other on in certain ways, or cut each other down in certain ways, is very reminiscent of how a lot of people interact with each other at the table.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's very much because of the fact that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser were based on the friendship that Fritz Leiber and Harry Otto Fisher had. So there was a lot of they were basically their kind of their idealized forms of themselves. So they had a lot of their interplay made it into those pages, at least the way that Fritz interpreted stuff. So I think that's one of the reasons that it comes off feeling so different from a lot of the other fantasy. because it is very grounded. It is very, like it is, like you say, it sounds realistic because it comes from, it comes from a real place rather than, anybody like a highfalutin, like, oh, I am a lordly knight and you're my squire. And I mean, it's I'm a huge Tolkien fan, but there at no point we always say that the interplay between like Frodo and Samwise sounds anything that like you would have with your best friend, no matter what was going on,
Right.
which is obviously not the case with the Fafhrd and Grey Mousers.
Mm. And just to keep talking a little bit about lean times in Lunkmar, the beginning chapter when Libra's describing the breakdown of the relationship between Fafhrd and Grey Mouser and the various rumors that were spread about it. I think my favorite is it was over the spelling of Fafhrդ's name.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, there's that, and in Ill Met in Lankmar,
Mhm.
there's exchange between the two of them where actually Mouser asks him what the correct pronunciation of his name is, and that is I'm about 100. I can't prove it, with evidence in court, but I'm 99% positive that is Fritz Leiber finally settling the discussion once and for all, because I'm sure people were like, is it Fafford? Is it Furford? Is like trying to figure out, fans of it not being able to agree on like how exactly they were spelled, because of course this is pre-internet, so
Mhm.
it's not like not like you could like see Fritz talk about it online, unless you were at a sci-fi convention that he happened to be attending. It's one of those words you saw, but very rarely heard it pronounced. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, so I think the spelling is part of that. The pronunciation, the other thing. It's definitely a great kind of a joke.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for anyone who's kind of wondering how that happens, maybe you've read the collections, but aren't aware of this. The Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories. Uh, the first one, I believe, was written in the 40s
Uh,
and
36, I believe, was when
1936.
Two Sought Adventure. It was mid to the late 30s. Um,
Gotcha.
and but actually, the first one was the first 20,000 words of what became Lords of Cornwall,
Mhm.
which actually Harry Otto Fisher had started, but it would not see published until many decades later. So Harry Otto Fisher technically wrote the first one, but it was not seen. The public didn't see it until long after Fritz had done his he had taken up the burden of being the official chronicler of the Fafhrd the Grey Mouser, as he put it. Uh,
Mhm. But then these stories were continuously written all throughout the 1940s, a little bit in the 50s, and then most of them were published in the 60s and the 70s, with a handful coming out in the 80s as well.
Yes. Yep. That's pretty much the way to it. There was a down period like right after the 40s and early 50s where kind of fantasy had fallen on the skids.
Mhm.
Once the pulps had shut down after World War II, there wasn't really much of a market for it until the late 60s, and that's when the Lord of the Rings came out, and that grabbed the kind of the public consciousness. And at that point, publishing companies were like, wow, apparently there's a market for this fantasy stuff. Let's start putting it. And that's when, Fritz said, hey, there's a market for my stories again. And that's when they started collecting the earlier stories and putting them in some sort of chronological order.
Mhm.
Which Fritz were never worried about. He was like Robert E. Howard. He was just like, I have an idea for a story. I don't know when it occurs, like in quote unquote in the timeline. But once they started putting them together, he wrote a bunch of like these filler stories that would tie one story to the other. That's why you have these weird kind of like 3,000 word stories, that just like it's like they're in a boat and they get blown away and they end up somewhere else, and then then like an actual story begins after that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting how publishers have gone back in time and placed these things in something resembling chronological order. It's not as jarring with these characters as it is with Conan. Sometimes, when you're reading the Conan stories, it's hard to place them in a specific time in Conan's life,
Mhm.
unless you're dealing with the stories of him being the king, which are at the end of his life. But
Right.
it,
Right.
with these collections and with these particular characters, there are certain moments where you're like, oh. This is weird. Why are we here? Okay, now I understand why we're here, because get to the next story.
Uh, And then, and then there's the one where suddenly they're in Earth.
Yeah.
They're on the coast of the Mediterranean. They're hanging around, just not far from Syria. And you're like, okay, where did this come from? And that was because that was an early story that Fritz had played around with before kind of like the idea of putting them on a fantasy setting had come to mind. Because originally there was going to be another one that he wrote, which had the Grey Mouser running around the Roman Empire. And he did preliminary work on that, and that would eventually turn into the Swords of Lankmar after he kind of like they kind of moved everything out of Earth, but he still had that story. He still had Adept's Gambit, and they had to kind of like retcon that, and so they wrote the wrong branch where they go into Ningalbol's cave and they end up suddenly with new identities on Earth. So it's like, hey, I can still publish this. It's like, I still make money off of this.
Now, steering back into the role playing aspect, when it comes to stuff like Lunkmar or Conan or any setting where there is an established character who is established as this is the greatest swordsman in the world, or these two are the two of the best thieves in the whole of Noan. How do you make players feel special, knowing that at any moment they could turn down an alleyway and see Grey Mouser jump out of a window and call up and be like, "Fafard, your turn."
Well, see, one of the great things about with Lankbar is that Fafhrd the Grey Mouser are canonically absent from the city for great deals of time. Whether that's for months, like when they do Stardock, when they go travel all the way to the cold waste and they climb like the mount, the Mount Everest of Newan, and then it takes them forever to get back. But there is the Price of Peonies, not the Price of Peonies, the Circle Curse, where they leave Lankmar for 3 years. And they are effectively gone from it. And then in the later part of their career, they leave Lankmar and they resettle on Rye Mile. So one of the sidebars we said in DC's and Lankmar, I said, if you're not comfortable having if you're not having the characters run into Fafhrd the Grey Mouser, or if they're not interested in that, it's very easy just to set your game during one of the during that 3-year period where they're out wandering around, or at that point where they have gone to Rime Island, they basically upstake and they don't live in Lankmar anymore. Or if you really want to go, you just run adventures before they show up. The only thing you lose is you lose some of like the established other characters, like you might have to create your own overlord of Lankmar. And some of the characters like Natick Nimble figures won't be around. But that's one of the good things about it. You can still use like Lankmar, the setting that they are inextricably part of, and not have them be present. So that was luckily Fritz had done that, so it was really easy just to write a sidebar that this is how you do it if you want to do it this way. It didn't require a lot of creative energy on my thought. Oh,
and saying that, I think one of the really interesting places to set a campaign within Lankmar, I think, would be right after Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser take their revenge on the Thieves Guild for killing their women. I think that's an interesting time to have an adventure take place, because at that point, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser aren't necessarily Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser just yet to the people of Lankmar. And there's this massive upheaval of, hey, this thing that kind of lorded over the city of Lankmar has been decimated by these two unknown guys from God's nowhere. What do we do now?
right. And that's right at as soon as they do that, that's when they leave the city for 3 years.
Yep.
So it's not only do you have this great kind of upshift in like the criminal demimond at that time, but you also have 3 years that are completely unchronicled in any of the stories. So if anything you write is just as good as as canon from library stories. It's that there's nothing that says otherwise. So it's the perfect window. And 3 years of game time, that's plenty of time to run a campaign that can go on for years of real time. Yeah,
absolutely. And then a similar time would be right after the aforementioned God of the Jug incident, because that's another time where they wander off, go into a cave, and hang around Earth for a while.
Yeah,
So
they take off in the Black Treasure, their stolen boat, and they run into the Sea King, and they have some adventures on there. Eventually, they end up in Ilfmar, and then wander off in the cave and go to Earth for a while. So yeah, it's like like I said, there's these perfect windows where they're not in the picture, so you don't have to worry about them showing up and stealing the characters, stealing the player's thunder, because they're off somewhere else doing other adventures that are unheard of at this point. So yeah, I mean it's one of the easier established settings, to deal with that. No.
now, when it comes for like support for Lankmar, obviously you guys have been very prolific when it comes to putting out adventures for just DCC proper. With Lankmar, has it been difficult to keep volume up with published adventures, or are you finding that a lot of your writers have lots of cool ideas for things that could happen within Nawan that would make for good adventure books?
Well, here's the thing: is that I out of my own sense of curiosity, a little while ago, I looked at where the Lankbar license has been in the past. TSR had it for a while. Mongo had it for a while. Pinnacle still has it, I believe. But I was just saying, like, okay, how many Lankbar releases did TSR do back in the day, and how much did Mongoose do, and how much did Pinnacle? And I am confident, depending on whether you count some of Pinnacle's like 1 or 2 page PDFs they put out, Goodman Games has produced the most material for Lankmar, most role playing material for Lankmar ever. So I am very happy with the sheer amount of stuff that we have done. I have also written a lot of that. Yeah. But obviously with me taking a new position, I do have to step back a little bit. So I don't have my opinion. So Brendan LaSalle just did he did Mercy on the Day of the Eel, which just came out, which was based on a game that he had been running for a while. I'm writing another Lankmar adventure right now. Harley Stroh is working on one as well. So we have things covered. We still have things coming out this year. This year, start a new year, printer demand, and availability notwithstanding. And then we have plans for Lankmar Phase 2, which is basically we're working on another box set. So the idea has always been we start with Lankmar, and that's because that's kind of like that's the crown jewel on there, and then we kind of circle around outward, and then we start exploring the rest of Nawan. So my eyes have been turned south from Lankmar lately. I've been looking at the jungles of Klesh. I have been looking at Quarmal. I have been looking at Tovilis. And then that's me personally, but there's a lot of places to the east and to the north, and so there's still a lot of ground that we have yet to cover, and there's still a lot of that ground I would like to cover before, because all licenses eventually have to come to an end, and I know someday the Lankmar license will pass on to somebody else, but there's still a lot of ground I want to get to do. So I would love to, because a lot of people do not like the Rime Isle stories, like Nawan's Iceland. And there's personally part of me like, I want to crack that nut. I want to be the one who takes Rime Isle and makes it to the point based on something and be like, you know what? I want to go adventure on Rime Isle. So I know if I can do that and do it successfully before the license ends, I will be happy. But yeah, there's no shortage of ground that we can cover. It's just a matter of figuring out what to do next. Actually, the targeting is the biggest, because theoretically, we at some, like I say, at some point the license will have to end, but we want to make sure we cover like the big stuff before that day happens. So I am currently like, I would love to do like a Stardock adventure, but the thing is, like, how do we make mountain climbing exciting? Like, if I can solve that problem, we will do a Stardock adventure, but there's got to be a way that is more than just like a series of ongoing ability check rolls, So I haven't quite figured out that mini game yet, but it's in the back of my mind. So
I've been working on what I've been calling dynamic combat rules, guidelines. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to land with that, but one of them is handling climbing a mountain and like what encounters would look like on the side of a mountain and what movement and combat would consist of on the side of a mountain. So my thoughts have been uh, on that particular subject a lot recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's very exciting in real life, but around the table, not so much.
Mhm.
so, so,
Yeah, and the conclusion that I've come to is basically you just have to go from set piece to set piece. So essentially have to skip over the climbing part. The climbing part, like you said, is a series of skill checks. You know, you're climbing.
right.
It's the moments where someone slips and falls, or the moments where some kind of rock scorpion or four-armed ape creature comes swinging down uh on a vine or on some kind of icicle or something like that to attack someone. That's where the mechanics and the action kind of kicks
Mm,
in, at
yeah.
least for what I've been kind of percolating in what I hope to someday publish.
Well, in the back of my mind, I think there might be an answer to it with the Shoots and Ladders board game.
That is interesting.
I think there might be a way to hack that. I haven't worked it out at a convention yet, but it's it's one of those things. Oh, you land on a square, have an adventure. Oh, you go up the ladder, you make progress on. Some downfall. So I mean, it might be there.
Mhm.
It's that, as I said at the start of the show, I am always looking for new games to figure out what I can steal for them and put them into a incorporating game, because nobody comes up with anything creative anymore. It's just we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, even though those giants might be named Milton Bradley.
Yep. Yep. As Richie Blackmore of Rainbow once said, you have to either be a creative genius or a clever thief. So,
Right, exactly, very much so.
and since we're talking about Lankmar, clever thief.
Exactly, and just don't let the Thieves Guild know that you're out there, unless you have your silver dagger and your license. No.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, I don't want to end this show without talking a little bit about what Goodman Games has on Kickstarter right now, which is the original adventures reincarnated for Dark Tower. So before we get into that campaign specifically, uh, what are the original adventures reincarnated for people who haven't heard of that particular line of product?
Okay. So the original Adventures Reincarnated began a couple of years back when Goodman Games has this tradition of basically of one of the reasons I get along with Joe so much. We're very interested about the history of the hobby. I mean, now we're almost 50 years of role play. In 2 more years, 2024, and we'll have 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons at this point. So Joe's been very interested in kind of recognizing the past and preserving the past. We worked with James M. Ward and did a lot of reprint of Metamorphosis Alpha, the first science fiction role playing game. So we we so looking at the past and providing some sort of historical context toward it. We would get people who were involved back then, interview them, and all the rest of that. So the oral line basically came out as part of this. So Joe, actually, Mike Merles, who was then the head of development for fifth edition D&D, he and Joe go way back. I think Joe published the first thing Mike ever wrote, which was like a army write up for Warhammer 40K, and Joe's like Warhammer 40K fanzine that he was like basically publishing out of his garage at some point back in the late 80s, early 90s. So Joe basically said, well, why don't we like convert some of the old adventures over for 5e, and we'll put commentary and stuff on that. We'll flesh out some of the areas which were left kind of undone. So that began with the very first one, which was B1 and B2 in Search of the Unknown and Keep on the Borderlands. So that was very well received, because there was the older crowd who had basically, I remember playing this, back in, 81 or whatever. And, or now I get to play my kids through it, using the 5e rules and, all this stuff that wasn't covered in there. So that's where the line started, and we did the first 6 of them were all done over old TSR Wizard properties. So we did B1, we did B1 and B2, as I said. We did the Lost City, we did Castle Amber, which I did that one, and we did the Isle of Dread, we did Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and then we did Temple of Elemental Evil, which that was a beast. But we had. Joe knew Janelle because they had originally done some of the Judges Guild stuff back during the 3.0, 3.5 years, and Janelle has been in the hobby since the start of it almost. So basically, Joe and Janelle came to arrangement, and Goodman Games bought the rights to Dark Tower. So we decided, okay, well, because we can't do PDF and we can't do virtual tabletop stuff just because of the agreement that we have with Wizards, we said, well, let's do one where we can do all that. So we said, and Dark Tower is it was voted one of the 30 great adventures of all time in a Dungeon magazine back in the 2000s. And it was the only non-TSR, non-Wizards title to appear on that list. And it's a classic for many, many reasons. So we figured that this was a time to approach it, and because we own the license outright, not only this time around could we do a 5e version of it, but we can also do a Dungeon Crawl Classic version of it. So we launched that Kickstarter last week, and as of today, I believe it's the most successful Kickstarter that Goodman Games has ever done. So it is such an interesting adventure. A lot of people are like, I've never heard of this one, and we're hoping that the or number 7 is going to be like, well, there's a reason you should, because it is a damn fine piece of adventure design. Janelle, every accolade that has ever been heaped on Janelle, she deserves every one of them. I mean, it is a master class. If you were interested on how to do a dungeon crawl, you deserve to take a look at Dark Tower. So we're very happy to kind of be bringing that one out and getting that back into the public view, and not only be able to do it for 5e, but we're doing it for DCC. And like I said, the first 6 of them were all based on existing Dungeons and Dragons properties. And all this one was originally written for AD&D back in 1979. The influence on this one, very much Robert E. Howard. I mean, you literally have a Temple of Mitra and a Temple of Set, and if you know your Robert E. Howard, those are 2 names that you're going to recognize in there. Mm-hmm. So looking over it, I would just like, this is like the perfect fit for DCC. This is like a fit that like the Isle of Dread or Keep on the Borderlands would never have, and I'm so happy that we get to do a DCC version of it. So,
yeah, and as we were talking about before we went on the air here, because I've been thinking so much and talking so much about running Dark Sun using DCC, I think Dark Tower is a good place to kind of launch an exploration of porting that particular adventure into the world of Athos and seeing kind of how it lines up with the world of Dark Sun.
Yeah, I mean there is of course with set involved, there's an Egyptian theme of course to it, so there's a lot of desert environment in it. So I mean so moving it from the Mitra's Fist, which is the setting of the Dark Tower, to Athos is very, very easy. I mean, of course you'll have to do some tweaks, but I mean that's what DCC is all about. Just tweaking the rules a little bit to make it the perfect fit. So
yep, absolutely. And just to sell people on this campaign even more, what you're getting with the physical editions of these books is this: it's a slipcover case with 3 hardback books, which include, I believe, the original adventure, the DCC version, or the 5e version, depending on which one you get. And I don't remember what the third book is.
There's two different sets. Each one of the sets has 3 books in it. So one of the books will be the same. So one of the books is the original Dark Tower that was published in 1979, and that one also has commentary about people were talking about it and everything. And then you have Dark Tower converted over to either DCC or to 5e, and then you have the third book, which we are calling the Sons of Set. And the Sons of Set is new material set in the Dark Tower, what I coin the term the Janelaverse. So basically, in Dark Tower there is the Temple of Set, and there are the Sons of Set, who are basically kind of like minor, almost demigods in the classical sense, like the son of a god, and through a mortal, and so Set has 4 of them, and one of them shows up in Dark Tower. So if one of them shows up in Dark Tower, that means 3 more of them are out there somewhere. So we did the Sons of Set, which basically those are 3 separate adventures, which each involves the other 3 remaining Sons of Set. So it's basically you can run it after doing Dark Tower, or you can run it as basically this campaign to shut down the threat of Set once and for all by taking out all 4 of the remaining Sons. So there's going to be a DCC version of them, and there's going to be a 5e version of both of that book for additional adventures of it.
Gotcha. And that is currently going on. It has 22 days left. There's all kinds of great add-ons for it, including miniatures. So if you're like me and the siren call of plastic or metal is irresistible to you, that option is available.
Right. And actually on Thursday night, there's going to be a show on the Goodman Games Twitch channel where we are actually going to reveal some more stretch goals. So I believe that is 8 p.m. Eastern off the top of my head. I don't have to check the invite, but if you're not doing anything, tune in there and you can hear us talk more about what you're going to get, because we have run out of stretch goals a week ago, it feels like. So we've been working on, okay, what do we do next? So there's been a lot of interesting talk going on. I think we're gonna have some stuff that people are going to be excited about. So if you're already part of following Dark Tower, tune in. If you want to know more about what's going on, also tune in there as well.
And to kind of round out our conversation here, for anyone out there who has not at least put their toe into the pool of Dungeon Crawl Classics, aside from a set of Xochi dice and the core book, what would you recommend people pick up if they are looking to start their adventures in Dungeon Crawl Classics?
If you are interested, if you are Dungeon Crawl Classic curious, if you're DCCCC, I would advise you to go forthwith to the Goodman Games website and do a search for the DCC starter bundle, starter package, starter kit. So for $30, that will get you a copy of the DCC rulebook in hardback. It will get you a copy of the DCC Judges Screen. It will get you an adventure, and it will get you a pack of 14 funky dice. And that's that is everything theoretically you will ever need to play Dungeon Crawl Classics for basically $5 more than what your standard kind of starter set goes, which is maybe of most main role playing games, where you might get like the first rules and how to get to level 2, this is basically everything you need to play for $30. So it is an insane deal. I don't know how Joe does it. If you have been playing DCC and you want to get a friend into it, that's the perfect way to, it's like the first one is only $30. And it's like we're doing it because once you experience DCC, if it is for you, it will be the beginning of a journey into a very, very interesting gaming, filled with very, very interesting and creative and all around nice people. So if you're on Facebook, I heartily recommend doing a search for the DCC Rocks group. That is the official DCC group. It is unofficial, but most everybody involved with DCC hangs out on there. There's also a DCC Discord channel as well, which if you do a search for that, I'm also part of that. Also, some of the other people's Goodman, and so yeah, I mean, there's stuff out there, and I said it's a very, very opening, very, very welcoming community, and just generally a lot of fun people. I'm very happy to be one of the few fandoms these days that I am happy to be part of with no reservations whatsoever. So
yeah, I have not run across a single person who plays DCC where I'm just like, just you stay over there, and we're gonna hide you from everyone when we're trying to convince them to play this game.
Right. It is a it is the as I call them, it is it is the greatest it is the greatest bunch of weirdos in a sea of weirdos I'm happy to be associated with. So there's a special quality about the DCC fans. So and
Mhm.
partially the fact that DCC is pretty much it's very old school in the way that it's rulings not is it's rulings not rules. So you don't get into arguments like what's the best character build or how to interpret. Most people are like this. Well, how do you think you want to do it? That's probably the right way, but we'll give you some suggestions on how you do. You very little of that, you're doing it wrong.
Mhm.
So I think that's one of the main reasons that the community is so welcoming.
Yeah, and the anarchic fun and just kind of weird intensity, but like a happy intensity. It reminds me very much of another group that I'm proud to call myself part of, Rush fans. So if those are your people, I find in general the Venn diagram of like Rush appreciators and gamers who enjoy DCC is pretty much a circle. So
There, there's a lot of overlap between certain classic rock bands. Like I mean, I'm willing to bet you will find a higher percentage of like Rush fans or like Hawkwind fans or Yes fans amongst the DCC crowd than you might ever under your standard like 5e group.
mhm. Oh yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just I mean, I when I run games at convention, I actually use a Yes album cover. I use Yes songs as my GM screen because it has like the
Nice.
Robert Dean artwork on the front of it, and it's just
Mhm.
so yeah. So,
Mm.
and,
And
and
for those of you who want to enter the world of Lankmar in DCC, the Lankmar box set, which I will hold up again and try not to reflect my light onto, this is your beginner uh, thing that you want to purchase. It comes with an adventure. It comes with the judge's guide to Nawan, and it comes with the secret knowledge supplement and no small crimes in Lankmar, which is an adventure where well your characters are this big.
you know, I always go back and forth. Like, should you ruin that? Except for the cover, just kind of ruins it for it anyway. So it's no big surprise. But I mean, and it has, as I was very proud to say, the most authentic map of Lankmar ever published.
Mhm.
So it is. I have. We did a lot of research in making sure that is correct. You will need a copy of the DCC rulebook, however, in order to play that. So again, go get your starter kit, $30. Get yeah, dice, everything you need, and get the Lankmar box set if you're a fan of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and you want to see how to do it the most faithful to the stories that has so far ever been done, as far as I'm concerned.
Mhm. And then for those of you who want to get into Lankmar, the setting, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, stories, if you're looking for a place to start, I will again recommend the first collection, which is Swords and Deviltry. If you just want to read one story, though, to start, I would say start with Ilmet and Lankmar, because that's the story of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser meeting for the first time. But Swords and Deviltry is that first collection. That's where you'll want to begin your reading journey of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Counter that,
Okay.
and we'll say that some people bounce off hard off of the earlier, like the origin stories.
Yep.
I know people have issue with Snow Women. I personally love it and everything like that. I think you could start with Sword Against Death, which I believe is volume 2, if I'm remembering off the hand, which starts with
Mhm.
which begins with Jewels in the Forest, which was, as we talked, that was the first one ever published.
Mhm.
And you can go from there, and because that has a lot of that is a good solid foundation of them. So if and it kind of like Conan, you don't necessarily need to know the origin story. You can kind of jump in and know these are two guys who've been hanging around for a while and they do crime. So I will say that if you do Swords Against Deviltry and it doesn't quite click for you, maybe put it down, do Swords Against Death, and see how that works out for you. No,
Mhm.
that's another option. In the DCC Legmar, actually, I suggest trying to read the books as they were published chronologically, not rather as they are collected. And you
Mhm.
can you can find a list. There's a bibliography of the years they were published in the box set too. So try to cover all the ground.
Absolutely. Well, guys, that is going to do it for tonight's episode. Mike, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about DCC, about Lankmar. It's always great to talk about these, stories that gave us the games that we enjoy today. So, thank you for allowing me to do that once again here on Rollin Bones.
It was a pleasure for me to come on and talk for an hour and change about stuff I love to talk about. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, guys, that's going to do it for tonight's episode. Once again, you can follow Valor Studios on Twitter. You should see a link for that over here in the chat. Also, subscribe and follow us here on Twitch if you feel so inclined. And definitely join us over on Discord in our Discord channel. Those are the best ways to find out what we have going on. We do have an announcement and a cool thing to share with you here at the end of the episode. Not to bury that announcement, though, I have another announcement of my own. That being the surprise kind of big episode that I've been teasing for the end of this month. And that is that next week, we are going to have Tracy and Laura Hickman, the creators of Dragonlance, here on Rollin Bones. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know there's a lot of you out there who are huge Dragonlance fans, so this is going to be your chance to hear about that particular series and setting here on Rollin Bones. So I'm looking forward to having the Hickmans on here, but not to bury the lead as far as this next announcement goes. Valor Studios is proud to announce the most recent, the newest addition to our actual play library, and that is coming up here. We've got this video to show you guys. Once again from Cheyenne Wright, this is Axion. So I hope you guys will join us next week. And until then, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and definitely stay tuned here for this Axion teaser. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you for watching Valor Studios on YouTube. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications.